Hi everyone, it's Nicole. Welcome back to my channel and another paper crafting video tutorial. Today we are featuring the STAMPtember 2023 limited edition exclusive from Kitchen Sink Stamps called All Aflutter. Each year during STAMPtember, Kitchen Sink Stamps brings us a beautiful stamp set, and this is no exception. So this is a stamp set featuring beautiful florals, butterfly, and a dragonfly. I'm going to feature the florals, creating this really pretty, what do I want to call it? Garden, I suppose, down below, flower garden, with some butterflies floating up above. After trying a couple of different ways, I ultimately settled on using acrylic blocks, going totally old school to do my stamp layering. Now, this works great because an imperfect floral garden definitely is kind of what I'm going for here. I don't mind the imperfection of it. If you want it to be super precise, I would still line it up with a stamp positioning tool, but you'll notice that not only am I stamping and doing my layering stamping, but I'm using some second generation layering stamping for some of the images, and some of the images I'm not. The reason being is I want this to look like a full flower garden, and it doesn't necessarily need to be super precise for the effect that I want. I will be doing my favorite technique of text layer stamping over the top of this as well, adding even more distress. Now, I have to say, some of the lighter images are actually even prettier than the dark ones. I love this effect. If you've never tried second generation stamping, I highly recommend giving it a try. You get some really cool looks with this technique. So I'm going to fill the entire bottom, basically half of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch panel of Neenah Desert Storm cardstock with my floral garden. I'm using Sprout and Field Pawsitively saturated inks for the greenery, and then we are using Heather, Violet, and Iris for our beautiful purple flowers. I went with a more muted color palette for my floral garden here. You could even mix up the colors if you want to, but I really was loving this particular color combination, so I stuck with that for my card. I have several acrylic blocks here, making it easy to do my stamp layering. And I'm really sorry, my head is going to be in the way a lot. One of the downfalls of this particular way of stamping and doing video, it's not really a downfall unless you're doing a video, is that, at least for me, I like to kind of get up over what I'm stamping, and so then my head is in the way of my video camera. Oh, I'm loving it. I think this is going to be really, really pretty. I could even see maybe doing this in a landscape format card as well, or you could, if you do art journaling or scrapbooking, creating a whole floral garden border. I think that would be pretty. So we're going to go in now and do our layering with our purples. Remember, the ink is going to be darker when it first is stamped. As it absorbs and dries into the cardstock, it will mute a little bit and soften, which is definitely the look we're going for. You'll notice as I start doing the layering portion of the flowers, it's going to look really, really dark, but in the finished photo, it's nice and soft and just the most perfect, beautiful violet flowers. In fact, we're going to use violet for our next step. This is the layering. I did opt not to layer every single floral. If it was a first generation stamped flower, yes, I added that. If it wasn't, sometimes I added it, sometimes I didn't. It helps add to that depth and dimension of our background. We may even just take like some of our third layering stamp and add in some extra color. The greenery is a 2-step process and the florals are a 3-step process. And I know I forgot to show this in the video, but the back of the packaging for the kitchen sink stamps is amazing as always. If you love kitchen sink stamps, you know they give you a multi-step alignment guide on the back, a suggested. Obviously do whatever you want to do there, but I love that it shows step by step where to line up each stamp for perfect placement. It is so handy and appreciated. My final layer here was the iris color, and I'm just kind of stamping off the rest of the ink on my ink block. And there is my floral garden. Now for my flower, and I think maybe my background might be a little bit too wide. I'm just going to snip that off so that it's 4 1/4 by 5 inches tall. There we go. I want to add a butterfly here. So I am grabbing some sentiments, the big butterfly from the set, and I'm laying it out. And I will use my Misty this time. I'm not doing multi-stamping. Well, I wasn't intending to. I did end up adding a little bit extra butterfly here in a minute, but that's okay. I decided to use a pink color combination. We're going to start, or pinky purple, I should call it. Bubblegum Sweets. And finally, Taffy is going to be the color combination. I did choose to use the Misty because you'll notice with that first base layer, with such a big solid layer, I felt that in case it didn't stamp correctly, I wanted to be able to stamp it again exactly, and I'm glad I did because I did need to. And it's much easier to line up this way. And again, the butterfly is going to mute as it dries as well. Now, something I thought of way after the fact, it would have been kind of fun for this third layer, I think, to stamp this and then emboss it with like a distress glaze. So that is another idea if you want to add kind of more of a glossy type of color layer to your multi-stamp stamping. I love my butterfly, so pretty. Okay, once I have that, I'm playing with my sentiments. I'm trying to figure out what I want to use, and I had switched it and I end up coming back to Flying By to Say Hi. That's what I wanted to use originally, and I decided I think I like that one the best, so that's what we're going to use. I like how the hi kind of settles in between those two taller florals. And then I will stamp Flying By to Say on a separate piece of cardstock. I wasn't sure. I think looking at it now, I probably would have just stamped the whole thing and embossed it with the Villainous Potion Distress Glaze embossing powder, and then just stamped over the whole thing and not done an extra layer. But this is a good tip. If you stamp something and it's not perfect and you need to cover it up, which does end up happening for me, but I also wasn't sure that it would show up when I stamp my text layer over the top, and so I opted to do it on a separate sentiment strip. So there were a couple of reasons here. I love how it turned out, so that's no big deal, but I did want to make mention of that. So I'm not stamping an entire extra butterfly, but just the tip or the bottom tips of the wings in that upper left corner. I felt like it filled it out a little bit better and made the scene a little more complete. Don't be afraid to make those adjustments as you're building your scene cards. We're going to add that last little layer here, get it lined up again. And then once we have that, I am going to stamp the hi with Embossing and Watermark ink and heat emboss with the Villainous Potion Distress Glaze. I love this because the color matches my card. So I really loved that about using one of the Distress Glazes in this way. it really complements the rest of the design beautifully. I think white would have been pretty, but I just really, really love the dark purple. I'm going to heat set this. And there may be a few stray embossing flakes. I love having a dry paintbrush on hand to kind of wipe away anything that might be sticking somewhere that I don't want it to. And that looks fantastic. Once we have that, I am going to stamp the background of my entire panel with the Friendship Text background stamp from Simon Says Stamp. As most of you know who've been here for a while, I love a little text background over stamping, stenciling, all of the things, but I don't want it to be super harsh and dark. And I also opted not to do a white pigment ink. A lot of times I will do a white pigment ink. I want this to be tone on tone, remember. So I am going to go with my lightest Pawsitively saturated ink in the color Heather, but to make it even lighter, because if we use the first generation stamping, I think it's still going to be too dark. I want just that hint of text. I am going to use second generation. So we're going to line up our stamp. We'll ink up the entire thing with the Heather ink. And I'm just using my cubes. That does take a little bit longer for a background stamp, but it worked out great. So if you just have the cubes, don't be afraid. You can do your background stamps with that. I've got a scrap piece of paper that I'm going to stamp the majority of my ink off on, and then I will press it pretty lightly to my background, and perfect. If that's too dark for you, consider even third generation. So stamp it once on a scrap piece of paper, stamp it again on a scrap piece of paper, and then use your third generation for an even lighter effect. Now, for my next step, I am going to use some of the Frozen Fog Distress Mica Stain to add a little bit of distress to the background. Frozen Fog is my favorite for a very silvery kind of almost sheen to the silvery sheen to a card that doesn't have tons of color, so it's not going to cover things up, but just add some splatter of sparkle, I guess, basically. Next, I did first stamp Flying By to Say Hi on a white piece of cardstock, and I'm going to tell you why. I thought at this point I had left a border to go around my panel, forgetting that my panel actually measures the size of my card. Now, I could have cut it down if I wanted to. And so I thought the white sentiment strip would look awesome. No, not when there's nothing else white on the card. I felt like it detracted and took away from the design. And I left it in because I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, that sometimes that happens where you're designing something and something doesn't work out exactly. Don't be afraid to make adjustments. And I knew you were going to see that also in parts of the video because I am taking a black fine tip pen and drawing in the antennae, and then a black jelly roll pen to add detail to the body of my butterfly and really make it stand out. And so I wanted to kind of explain the thought process behind making adjustments as you go. So I basically followed those same steps as before, but I did stamp and emboss Flying By to Say on some Desert Storm cardstock using the Villainous Potion Distress Glaze, pardon me. And then I have some of these beautiful hearts. These are from Lucy's Little Things, and I thought they matched perfectly. They're one of my favorite colors. And I'm going to add a scattering of those to my finished card design. I did pop up my sentiment strip with foam, and I've glued my panel to a white top fold card base. And I love just adding those little unexpected hearts. It ties into everything. I love the Distress Mica Stain. You can see some bigger splatters, but you can also just see some little shimmery splatters. It adds to the beauty of this card design. Imagine doing this in any of your favorite color combos. You could even do a whole rainbow assortment of cards. Like I would do a whole tone on tone card, but in a rainbow assortment. You could do like reds and oranges and yellows, all of the things, and have a whole beautiful set of cards. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this STAMPtember 2023 limited edition exclusive from Kitchen Sink Stamps called Aflutter. The supplies I used are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me today for another paper crafting tutorial. I love being able to share with this incredible community of crafters. I want to give a huge shout out and special thank you to my amazing Patreon members. If you're interested in joining Patreon, please click the link in the description underneath the video here on YouTube. Patreon is a private community where you can support more of what I do. There is exclusive content, information, and behind the scenes content. Top tier members will receive a handmade birthday card during your birthday month, access to D-Stash, and monthly exclusive lives, plus so much more. We would love to have you join our growing community. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, hit that like button, and don't forget to click the notification bell to always be notified when there is a new video or I go live. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you again next time.